Why would police pull over a man who had broken no law? It was a quiet morning in London's suburbs when Anthony Walker drove his black Mercedes home from an early meeting. The sky was pale blue, his suit sharp, his demeanor calm. Yet when flashing lights appeared in his mirror, his stomach tightened. He knew that look in their eyes before they even stepped out of the car. Officer Miller approached first, his hand already resting on his holster. Without greeting, he barked for Anthony's license and registration. Anthony complied silently, his movements slow and deliberate. Miller's tone was cold. He glanced at the expensive car, then back at Anthony with suspicion. Officer Barnes stood behind him, uneasy but silent. Miller asked where Anthony had gotten the car, hinting it might be stolen. Anthony replied politely that he was on his way home from work. But Miller smirked and muttered something about people like you driving cars like this. The words burned, but Anthony didn't react. He had seen men like Miller his entire life. Miller told him to step out. Anthony did, calm but alert. Barnes looked nervous now, whispering that the man was cooperating, but Miller ignored him. He asked to search the car. Anthony knew he had no reason, but refused calmly, asking for a valid cause. Miller's pride flared. He ordered Barnes to handcuff him for resisting. The cuffs clicked around Anthony's wrists. He didn't resist, only looked straight into Miller's eyes and said quietly, "You're making a mistake." Miller scoffed, "We'll see about that." As they led him to the back of the car, neighbors began to peek out. Barnes looked down, conflicted. Anthony's phone buzzed on the car seat, Naomi's name glowing on the screen. She'd soon learn her husband hadn't done anything wrong, yet was standing handcuffed on the street. The calm man they mocked was about to change their lives forever. Comment what you would have done if you saw this happen. Watch the full story in the next chapters. Subscribe now for more powerful true-to-life stories that open eyes and hearts. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Anthony's wrists as he stood by the side of the road, the sunlight glaring off the hood of his Mercedes. Officer Miller strutted around him like a man who believed the badge gave him the right to humiliate others. "Nice car," Miller sneered. "Where'd you steal it from?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. Anthony didn't respond. He kept his gaze steady, his voice calm, the same voice that had commanded courtrooms and government meetings. "Officer, I've already told you this is my vehicle. My registration is in the glove compartment." Miller ignored him, turning to Officer Barnes. "Check it," he ordered. Barnes hesitated, glancing at Anthony's suit, at the briefcase lying in the passenger seat. Something didn't add up. He opened the glove box, pulled out the registration, and paused. The name read, Anthony Walker, Attorney General of the United Kingdom. Barnes' eyes widened slightly. He looked at Miller, unsure whether to speak, but Miller's ego burned too bright. "What's the hold-up?" Miller barked. Barnes stammered, "Sir, maybe we should do as I said," Miller snapped, cutting him off. Meanwhile, Naomi's car screeched to a halt down the street. She had traced his phone's location, panic rising in her chest. The sight of her husband, calm, composed, yet handcuffed, made her heart ache and her blood boil. She rushed toward them, shouting, "What is going on here?" Miller turned sharply. "Ma'am, stay back. This is police business." But Naomi wasn't a woman who stayed back. "Police business?" she repeated, her voice trembling with fury. "That man is my husband. Do you even know who you're arresting?" Miller laughed dismissively. "Ma'am, please, we know what we're doing." Naomi's tone dropped, her eyes narrowing. "Apparently not." She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, dialing a number. "Hello, this is Naomi Walker. My husband's been detained without cause." "Yes, the Attorney General. I'm sending you our location right now." Barnes froze. Miller's smirk disappeared. The color drained from his face as the realization crept in. "Attorney General," he muttered under his breath. He looked at Anthony, who stood quietly, watching, his dignity unbroken despite the handcuffs. A black car appeared down the road, moving fast. Within minutes, 2 government security vehicles pulled up. Men in suits stepped out, flashing IDs, "Uncuff him." "Now," one of them commanded. Miller's hand trembled as he fumbled with the keys, unlocking the cuffs. Anthony rubbed his wrists gently, saying nothing. Silence filled the street, a heavy, uncomfortable silence that even the wind dared not disturb. Naomi stood beside him, her hand gripping his arm tightly as if to reassure herself he was safe. The agents turned to Miller. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Miller tried to speak, but his words stumbled. He looked suspicious. One agent glared. "Suspicious? You just handcuffed the country's top law enforcement officer." Barnes lowered his eyes in shame, whispering, "Sir, I tried to tell him." Miller's arrogance cracked, replaced by fear and humiliation. Anthony finally spoke, his voice calm but cutting through the air like a blade. "You judged me before you even asked a question. You saw my skin, not my title. You saw threat, not integrity." Miller opened his mouth to apologize, but Anthony raised a hand. "Save it, your apology means nothing until your mindset changes." The words landed like thunder. Naomi's eyes filled with tears, not of weakness, but of pride. Her husband had once again stood tall where others would have broken. The government agents escorted Anthony and Naomi to their car, while the entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence. Officer Barnes whispered a quiet, "I'm sorry," as they passed, but Anthony simply nodded, understanding that guilt wasn't enough to erase injustice. As their car drove away, Naomi glanced back through the window at the two officers standing frozen in disbelief. "Do you think they'll change?" she asked softly. Anthony looked ahead, his expression calm yet weary. "Maybe not today. But maybe someone watching will." Comment below what you'd do if you saw this happen. Watch the next chapter to see how Anthony turns this humiliation into a powerful stand for justice. Subscribe for more emotional and eye-opening stories that reveal the truth behind power and prejudice. The morning after the humiliating arrest, the world had already heard. Anthony Walker's name filled every headline across the UK. Attorney General wrongfully detained by police, one read. Racial profiling at its highest level, said another. Cameras lined the gates of his home, reporters shouting questions, microphones flashing under the grey London sky. But Anthony remained silent. He wasn't ready to speak, not yet. He sat at the dining table, his hands clasped, eyes staring into his untouched cup of tea. Naomi watched him, her heart heavy. "You have to say something," she whispered. "You can't let this be another story people forget in 2 days." Anthony nodded slowly. "I will," he said quietly, "but not just for me. For every man who's been treated like a suspect before being treated like a human." That afternoon, Anthony arrived at the Ministry of Justice. His presence turned heads. Every step he took echoed through the marble hallway, calm, deliberate, powerful. Inside the main press room, dozens of journalists waited, murmuring with anticipation. Cameras clicked as he stepped up to the podium, the nation watching live. He adjusted the microphone, took a slow breath, and began. "Yesterday, I was pulled over on a quiet road. I was handcuffed, humiliated, and accused of stealing my own car. I was not seen as a citizen. I was not seen as the Attorney General. I was seen as a threat because of the color of my skin." The room fell silent. No one dared move. His voice was steady, but his words carried the weight of generations. "I've spent my life defending the law, but yesterday I learned how easily that law can be bent by bias, twisted by arrogance, and stained by prejudice." Naomi watched from the front row, her eyes glistening with tears. Cameras zoomed in on Anthony's face, calm yet fierce, like a man fighting centuries of injustice with words instead of weapons. "To the officers involved," he continued, "I do not seek revenge. I seek accountability. I seek change. Because racism in uniform is still racism, and silence is no longer an option." Every word struck deep. Across the country, people who had once been ignored finally felt seen. Anthony's speech spread like wildfire, playing on every news channel, trending on every platform. Within hours, the police commissioner called for an emergency inquiry. Officer Miller and Officer Barnes were summoned to headquarters for questioning. Inside the small interrogation room, Miller sat stiffly, his arrogance replaced by visible fear. Barnes sat beside him, guilt etched into his face. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," Barnes whispered. Miller glared. "We did our job," he snapped, but even he didn't sound convinced anymore. Moments later, the door opened, and in walked Anthony. The officers froze. He wasn't there to shout or threaten. He stood tall, composed, his calm presence filling the room with quiet authority. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "I came to look you both in the eye, because if I let this stay as headlines and paperwork, then it becomes just another story. But this isn't just a story, it's a mirror showing us who we really are." Barnes lowered his gaze. "Sir, I'm sorry," he murmured. Anthony nodded. "I believe you mean that." Then he turned to Miller. "And you?" Miller swallowed hard. "I made a mistake," he said through clenched teeth. "No," Anthony replied calmly, "you made a choice. You chose to see me as guilty before you knew a single fact. You chose to act out of prejudice, not law." The room went still. Miller's face flushed red with shame. "I can't change what you did," Anthony continued, "but I can make sure it never happens again." He turned toward the commissioner. "I want a nationwide police training reform, mandatory bias awareness, legal accountability for wrongful arrests, and public transparency." The commissioner hesitated, but Anthony's authority left no room for refusal. "Approved," he said finally. Anthony nodded, then looked back at Miller and Barnes. "You'll both face disciplinary action, but you'll also attend those training sessions. Change doesn't begin with punishment. It begins with understanding." He turned and walked out, his coat flowing behind him like a silent wave of dignity. Outside, the press was waiting again. "Mr. Walker, do you forgive them?" a reporter shouted. Anthony paused, then smiled faintly. "Forgiveness is not forgetting," he said. "It's teaching the lesson so it never happens again." That night at home, Naomi placed her head on his shoulder as they sat by the fireplace. "You could have destroyed them," she said softly, "but you chose to teach them." Anthony looked at her, his eyes reflecting both strength and exhaustion. "If I destroy them," he said, "the system learns nothing. But if I make them face their own reflection, maybe the next black man won't have to go through this." Naomi smiled, her hand finding his. "You're changing the world, one truth at a time." He looked into the fire, the flames dancing like memories of struggle and hope. "Maybe not the world," he said quietly, "but at least the hearts that still believe in justice." Outside, the city lights glimmered under the night sky. Somewhere across town, Officer Barnes sat alone in his apartment, staring at the television replaying Anthony's speech. Tears welled in his eyes. Meanwhile, Miller sat in silence, the weight of his actions finally breaking through his pride. For the first time, he didn't see color, he saw conscience. And as the screen faded, Anthony's voice echoed one last time. "Justice is not about power, it's about perspective." And today, the law finally saw itself in the mirror. Days turned into weeks, but the storm that followed Anthony Walker's speech only grew louder. Across the nation, his words had ignited something far greater than anyone expected. Young people filled the streets of London, Manchester, and Birmingham, carrying signs that read, "Justice has no color," and "Reform now." News anchors replayed his speech on every channel, universities invited him to speak, and the Prime Minister requested a private meeting. But with every spotlight came resistance. Behind closed doors, politicians whispered that Anthony's stand had divided the country. Police unions called him a man out to destroy the force. Yet Anthony stood firm, his calm presence unshaken. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, profiled, or humiliated for the color of their skin. At home, Naomi felt the tension in every phone call, every message that came through the door. Some praised her husband, others sent threats. She'd lie awake at night listening to the soft hum of the city outside their window, watching Anthony's reflection as he read over reform documents by lamplight. "You can't fight everyone, Anthony," she whispered one night. He didn't look up. "I'm not fighting everyone," he said softly, "just the idea that some people think justice belongs to them alone." Naomi walked over, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Then promise me one thing," she said. "Promise me this fight doesn't take the light out of you." Anthony looked up at her with a faint smile. "You are the light, Naomi. I couldn't lose it if I tried." The next morning, Anthony stood before Parliament. The room was tense, the air thick with politics and pride. Some MPs clapped as he entered, while others crossed their arms, waiting to challenge him. He placed his papers on the table, his voice calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what happened to me is not an isolated event. It is a reflection of something broken in the system we swore to uphold. Murmurs rippled through the room. He continued, justice should not depend on skin tone, postcode, or prejudice. It should depend on truth. And if the law does not see everyone equally, then it is not justice, it is hypocrisy wearing a uniform. The chamber went silent. One senior MP stood up, visibly annoyed. Are you accusing our entire police force of racism? He demanded. Anthony looked at him steadily. No, sir. I am accusing our silence of allowing it. The room erupted, half in applause, half in outrage. Outside, the public response was explosive. Protests spread to every major city, peaceful yet powerful. News footage showed mothers holding their children's hands, students chanting, even retired officers marching with signs of solidarity. Meanwhile, Officer Barnes stood among them, his uniform replaced by plain clothes, his eyes heavy with guilt, but his steps filled with purpose. He opened my eyes, he told a reporter. I saw the man before the badge that day, and now I see what justice should really mean. Across town, Officer Miller watched the same coverage from his apartment. He hadn't slept in days. His phone buzzed with messages from colleagues urging him to stay quiet, to protect the department. But his conscience wouldn't let him. The next morning, he walked into the police station and handed in his resignation. I was wrong, he told his chief, and I need to make it right. Meanwhile, Anthony prepared for his most important address yet, the National Conference on Law and Equality. Every major leader, police chief, and justice official was in attendance. As he took the stage, the lights dimmed and the crowd hushed. Naomi watched from the front row, her heart pounding with pride and fear. Anthony's voice filled the hall. Every great nation faces a moment when it must choose between comfort and courage, he said. This is ours. We can keep pretending racism ended when the law changed, or we can face the truth that it still breathes in the way we judge, suspect, and condemn. His voice grew stronger. I stand here not to divide us, but to remind us equality is not a favor, it's a right, and justice that ignores color is the only justice worth defending. The hall erupted in applause, cameras flashed. But in the middle of the crowd, a small group of critics rose and walked out, a silent protest against his truth. Anthony watched them go, then turned back to the audience. Let them leave, he said. Because silence has already done enough damage. The crowd roared. His words reached millions watching live on television. By the end of the day, the Prime Minister publicly announced the Walker Initiative, a nationwide reform package requiring bias training for all officers, independent oversight for wrongful arrests, and harsher penalties for racial discrimination in law enforcement. For the first time in years, real change had a name. That night, Anthony and Naomi walked through Hyde Park, the city lights shimmering around them. You did it, Naomi whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. We did it, he replied. Every voice that spoke up, every person who refused to stay silent, they did it. They sat on a bench, hands intertwined, watching a group of young black and white children play together nearby. That's the future, Naomi said softly. No fear, no division. Anthony smiled. That's why I fought, he said, not to be seen as powerful, but to make sure they never have to explain why they belong. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Officer Miller stood outside the protest crowd, unnoticed and alone. He approached a group of volunteers handing out flyers for equality reform. Can I help? He asked quietly. The young woman leading them looked at him skeptically, then nodded slowly. Everyone can, she said. For the first time, Miller felt something new, the heavy weight of redemption. As weeks passed, the Walker Initiative became law. Anthony's story became a symbol of courage, not anger. His calm defiance inspired others to confront their own silence. And though the scars of injustice would take generations to heal, his voice had planted a seed that no hatred could uproot. Months later, during a television interview, the host asked, Mr. Walker, what do you want people to remember most about what happened? Anthony paused, his eyes thoughtful. That I was never trying to prove I was innocent, he said. I was trying to prove that no one should have to. The screen faded to black as his final words echoed, justice without equality isn't justice, it's privilege in disguise. Comment below. Do you believe one man can change an entire system? Your voice matters. Let it be heard. Subscribe for more powerful true-to-life stories that expose